Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Bob Unger Show, and we are really honored and privileged. And you know, I don't just say things like that. We have Dr. Vermelle Green, who is an educator and a follower of God, more importantly. And therefore, she has actual standards of right and wrong that are totally apart from any issues of color or national origin or what have you, right and wrong. And she has written a book called Please Teach Me Like I'm a Boy. And she's been an educator for many years. And Dr. Green, give us a little bit of your background growing up, what made you go into this field, your metamorphosis, so to speak.
All right. First of all, Bob, thank you for having me. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, the daughter of a secretary who decided she wanted to become a teacher. And from that, she became eventually a principal. So it was kind of in our blood to go into education, even though I tried to fight it. When I went to college, I enrolled in the pre-med program. I said I wanted to be a doctor. Then I found out, unfortunately, that I didn't like being around sick people. So I decided that that's not really what I should do. So I ended up majoring in biology and became a biology teacher and teaching in high school in an area right outside Washington, D.C. One thing I noticed among my students is that many of them did not read very well. I would, tell them to sound out a word, and they would look at me like I had two eyes. What does that mean, sound out a word? Because they had been taught to read what is called whole language, by whole language. And I didn't realize this. It wasn't until eventually I left the classroom, became an administrator, and I was an administrator at the elementary level, observing a first grade teacher teaching reading and hearing her say, oh, all right, children, follow along with me. The dog is in the, you don't know that word? Well, look at the first letter. Look at the last letter. Look at the picture. Can you guess what that word is? And when I heard that, I said, well, no wonder our babies can't read. Can you guess what the word is? Look at the picture. And that began my true odyssey into the roots of the problems that were happening in education. From there, I would walk down the hall and I would look into the special education class, and I saw predominantly boys. And I would walk past the talented and gifted classes and saw mostly girls. I had assigned some students to in-school suspension who had gotten into trouble for assorted reasons. And as I looked at the group that was going into in-school suspension, I saw boy, 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 girl, boy, 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 boy. And I kept thinking, what's with our boys? That they're maxed out in special ed, they're not in talented and gifted, they're getting in trouble. And I happened upon a book and some articles, and the premise of those articles were that boys learn differently than girls. And I said, what? Boys learn differently than girls? Now, in all my years, preparation to be a teacher, workshops, sort of seminars that they send you to, they talked about multiple intelligences. They talked about auditory learners and visual learners and tactile learners, but they never said that the way that you learn is dependent upon your gender. As I continue to do more research, I found out that boys' brains process information differently. And as I read more and more, I said, oh my goodness, that's when I had an epiphany. That's why our boys are doing this and getting into trouble and not able to do this. That's why the girls are kind of leaving them behind. That's why. And why aren't more people talking about this? And I kept hitting brick walls when I would talk to people about this. I'm thinking, it's so obvious. Why aren't you listening? The only people who were really receptive to what I was talking about were the teachers themselves, that they said, yes, that is true. But when you tried to talk to administrators and those policymakers, they weren't very receptive to that idea at all. You know, they had it already set up that this is what's going to happen. When I retired, I knew that my pastor wanted to start a school. So I went to him with all these statistics about boys and how they were failing in school and failing in life and, you know, society and in prison and all this kind of thing. So I said this, how about a school just for boys? A Christian school for boys, K through 8. He really had a heart for men. So he said, you know, let's go for it. In preparation for that school, I visited our state's Department of Education to find out what other schools were like that. And the woman who was in charge of the non-public school office said, well, Christian school K through 8, there are none. And I said, oh, in my county? She said, no, there are none in the state. And I thought, my goodness, there needs to be something like that on every corner, a school for boys to teach them the way that they learn, to give them what they need developmentally, academically, who can understand them and can build up their self-esteem and help them to feel good about themselves, and help them to realize that they are not failures, a school that will help them to read with systematic explicit phonics, the
All
way
right.
the boys need. Yes,
Amen.
yes, because our poor babies, not just our boys, but our girls as well, we have a country of illiterate children who cannot read because they haven't memorized all the words.
And then they drug them up and say, just say no to drugs.
Yes, because boys are just too active. They won't focus. You know, they're sloppy. They want to run and play, and they're always touching things. And you know, they need to be more like the girls. That's what they're saying, in effect.
Mm-hmm.
They're treating our boys like they're defective girls. And when they start labeling them ED, ODD, ADD, ADHD, and all the other alphabet soup, then they're able to say, okay, we're putting them in a box, and this is how we're going to treat them, which is criminal because we're raising a generation of little boys who are being medicated into submission, which is criminal. I used to tell the parents who were coming to my school who said that their son was on Ritalin or Adderall or Prozac or whatever, I said, take him off. You know, we're going to teach him the way he learns, and we're not going to keep him seated all day with his hands folded, not being able to get up and run. I said, we're going to have 2 recesses all through instructional time. We're going to give him breaks to move around, to play. That's the way that boys learn, very basic techniques. And that's what we set out to do. The school closed after about 14 years. Finances caught up with us because many of our boys were the sons of single moms who really couldn't afford to pay the tuition, the cost that it takes to educate a child, to keep a school open. But when we closed after 14 years, it allowed me to go out and sound the clarion call to whomever would listen. Some groups more so than others, and I shared with you before, Bob, when we were talking, that some groups have been very receptive. Homeschool parents, Christian school educators, very receptive to the message that boys learn differently than girls. Unfortunately, there are a lot of educators out there who they're not very receptive at all, who see me talking about boy and girl learning differences as being binary or offensive, and not taking into account the LGBTQRSTUIVWXYZ kinds of issues that are out there. You know, I tell you, Bob, before I said, hey, I'm 70 years old, and I'm at the age now where I'm going to say what I want to say, you know, as the Lord leads. And so if people start writing you letters, don't send the copies to me. I'm not going to read them.
Well, I love to get you somehow in touch with the mayor of New York.
Oh my, I don't think.
Yeah, you never know, because
oh my goodness.
Could you imagine?
I speak truth to power, and he might not be able to handle.
Could you imagine how, in particular, lower income kids of any color would be helped by this.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And, you know, I live in a wealthy suburb in Long Island called Great Neck. And all the parents think that these schools are so great. Meanwhile, all the kids are going to Tutors. And there's an Asian company called Kuman.
Mm-hmm.
And you got all these kids lined up, going in after school hours, constantly going to Tutors. So the parents are paying all the real estate taxes to support the schools and then paying twice by going to a tutor, you know?
Yep.
And if someone like you was in charge and putting together a program where you would teach in the way you're expressing, you would help the politician because he'd look like $1 million that in his city, all of a sudden, these kids who everyone thought are failing because of themselves, you know, because they love to blame the parents. And I'm not saying that every parent is fantastic. That's not my point. But the first thing they do is they blame the parents or they blame the kid, and they come up with every reason in the world. A good teacher, when they're not getting through to a kid, says to himself or herself, what am I not doing that I could do to get through to this kid? They don't right away blame the person they're trying to teach. And
Correct.
this gives them the greatest alibi. I had a woman across the street whose kid couldn't read. And this is a smart, upper income Jewish kid. And I said to her, what are you doing about it? Your kid spent a year in school and can't read. I got a tutor. I said, really? Who's the tutor? His teacher. Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
Oh my goodness.
You're gonna pay her twice? This is the same person. That's like going to a surgeon who cut off the wrong leg and you go back for the other leg. It makes no sense, no logic. But you know what they say, that the master of lies creates a world that has no logic. The master of the
Amen. Amen.
This is how all this craziness is happening. And we got to follow